The ghost trapped underwater presented by Absolutely Haunted. The lake had always worn a mask of serenity, tucked deep between shadowy, time-worn forests and gentle, undulating hills. Its glassy surface reflected the sky like a mirror, rarely stirred except by the lazy sigh of a breeze or the fleeting trail of a dragonfly. But beneath that calm, beneath layers of silt and forgotten time, something old and restless had been waiting. Silent. Watching. It's been patient, as the years slipped by, one by one. It was a local fisherman who first spotted the shape. It was half buried in the lakebed as the drought drained the water to an unnatural low. At first, he assumed it was just more forgotten wreckage, a capsized canoe maybe, or some rusting scrap left to rot beneath the surface. But the longer he stared, the more the outline sharpened, refusing to be dismissed. It wasn't driftwood. It wasn't a boat. It was a car. Sunken, silent, and waiting. Authorities were notified, and before long, a dive team arrived, their silhouettes rippling on the surface of the lake like distorted ghosts. They moved with quiet urgency, the slap of water against their suits the only sound as they checked their gear. Then, one by one, they slipped beneath the surface and vanished into the dark. The water was colder than expected, unnaturally so. Visibility was little more than a few feet, and the silt swirled around them like smoke. Their flashlights barely pierced the murk, but then it appeared, emerging from the gloom like something exhumed. A car, a Volkswagen Bug, 1970s by the look of it. It sat slanted in the mud like a coffin that had shifted in its grave. The once bright green paint was muted, its surface crawling with algae and grime, giving it the sickly pallor of something long dead. As one diver drew closer, a sudden metallic creak echoed through the silence, an impossible sound in the vacuum of water, and his light caught on the windshield. What was left of it was smeared from the inside, as if something had tried to claw its way out. He made his way to the bumper of the car and pried off the old license plate. He put it in his dive bag to carry it to the surface. Maybe they could get some answers when they find out who the car belongs to. As their flashlight beams swept across the car, a shape became noticeable slumped in the driver's seat. No, it's not a shape, a body, or what remained of one. The skeletal frame was draped in tatters of clothing, barely clinging to brittle bone. Time and water had done their work. What flesh had once clung to the figure had long since dissolved into the murk, feasted upon by the silent things that dwelled in the depths, scavengers that left no mercy, only ruin. The skull was tilted slightly to one side, as if in final resignation, its hollow sockets gazing out through the cracked windshield. A few strands of hair floated like weeds in the shifting water, caught in the drift, and from the diver's angle, it almost looked like the figure was watching them, waiting. A soft thud echoed through the water, one of the divers jerking back, his fin hitting the roof of the car. But the skeleton didn't move. It didn't need to. The lake was already telling its story, and it wasn't done. The skeletal remains sat eerily upright in the driver's seat, hands still resting on the wheel, as if the person had taken one final, lonely drive and never returned. The bones were arranged with unnatural precision, too intact for the time past, too poised for peace. The fingers curled loosely around the wheel, tendons long vanished, yet the posture suggested intent or restraint. Something about the scene was wrong, deeply wrong. The seatbelt was still fastened, the buckle rusted shut like a sealed tomb. A faded air freshener, shaped like a tree and long robbed of scent, drifted lazily from the rearview mirror. The interior was filled with floating sediment and tatters of moldy fabric, but beneath it all, something shimmered faintly near the footwell. One of the divers moved closer, light steady, heart pounding. There, scratched into the dashboard with something sharp, letters, jagged, erratic, as if etched by a trembling hand in the final seconds of life. "I'm still here." The diver recoiled, bubbles erupting from his mouthpiece as a sudden pressure seemed to close in around them all. The lake had been silent for years, but now it was listening, and something inside that car wasn't ready to let go. The divers were grateful to surface. They had one of the officers standing around the scene run the plate, and sure enough, it came back to a cold case from 1986. A young girl, 20, named Lillian Gantry, went missing in the fall of 1986, shortly after her father had bought her the very car she was entombed in now. Bringing up a submerged vehicle wasn't new to the crew, but this one felt different. The divers worked in grim silence, hooking thick chains to the corroded frame while the surface team engaged the winch. Inch by inch, the lake relented, as if releasing something it had hidden for far too long. Then, the car began to rise. A deep, guttural groan echoed from the waterlogged hull, low and resonant, like the lake itself was sighing in protest. The green Volkswagen Bug emerged from the depths, soaked and shuddering, trailing dark ribbons of algae like wet hair. Water streamed from its seams, from the gaping windows and cracked doors, puddling at the edge of the shore like blood from a fresh wound. Its headlights, lifeless and dull, caught the fading light and seemed to stare forward with vacant intent, like blind eyes that still remembered. Then, everything started to go wrong. The winch stuttered violently, screeching with a mechanical shriek as if something had gripped the line from below. One of the chains snapped with a whip crack, recoiling across the shore and narrowly missing a crew member. Radios sparked and hissed with static. The air, moments ago just humid, turned sharp and cold, stinging the skin like sleet. And then came the smell, foul and cloying, not of decay, but of something older, something buried. The kind of scent that clings to nightmares. Birds scattered from the treetops. A low vibration rippled through the ground. And from inside the car, behind the cracked windshield, droplets began to form. Not condensation, but something thicker. It was red, slow, trickling down the glass, like the vehicle was bleeding. They had brought it up, and now it was awake. From out of nowhere, things began to unravel, swiftly, violently, like the car's curse had finally broken loose. First, the tow truck stalled. No warning, no sputter, just silence. The engine died mid-groan as if choked off by invisible hands. The driver, red-faced and bewildered, climbed out, swearing it had been running perfectly just minutes ago. For that matter, all day without so much as a hiccup. He opened the hood, expecting something obvious, something mechanical. But the engine looked fine. Then came the coughing. Mark, one of the most seasoned divers on the team, suddenly dropped to his knees beside the pulled-up wreck, clutching at his chest. His breath hitched violently as he coughed, racking spasms that shook his whole frame. Mud spattered from his gloves as he tried to steady himself, his body heaving like something inside was trying to escape. "What's wrong?" someone shouted, rushing to his side. "Mark, what's happening?" But he couldn't answer. His throat rattled with every attempt, his mouth opening wide in silent agony. He only shook his head, eyes glassy and wide. Too wide, as if he were choking on more than just water. As if something unseen had reached into his lungs and taken hold. Then, his gaze locked on the car, unblinking, terrified. And behind the fractured glass of the driver's side window, something moved. Just for a moment, a flicker, a twitch, a shadow. Not outside the car, but on the inside. Mark's coughing slowed, but his body trembled, pale with shock. He sat hunched on the gravel, soaked and shivering, as the others surrounded him, unsure whether to call for an ambulance or run. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice thin and raw, barely more than a whisper. "It felt like something grabbed me," he rasped, eyes locked on the green bug, still dripping lake water like it was bleeding. "There's something in the car." The team exchanged uneasy glances, but no one laughed. No one scoffed. The air was too still. The shadows are too heavy. "You mean you got caught on something on the car?" someone asked hesitantly. Mark shook his head, slow and deliberate. "No, in the car. It wrapped around my chest, like hands, cold, pulling." No one spoke. Then, behind them, a click echoed in the silence. The sound was sharp and deliberate, like a knuckle cracking in a quiet room. The crew froze. Something sloshed inside the car. A sour stench hit the air, overpowering, as if the bottom of the lake had exhaled centuries of rot all at once. A few feet away, The mechanic staggered back, covering his mouth. And then, a voice. Faint, garbled, like it came from underwater. "Let me drive." It sounded low and wet, almost playful. Everyone heard it. One of the younger deputies turned and ran. The others stood frozen in place, staring at the closed car door, where the skeleton sat. The seatbelt slowly began to move, curling inward, like it was inviting someone in. Or maybe it was waiting for someone to join it. They chalked it up to exhaustion, a collective hallucination. But as the crew worked to pry open the rusted door, a sudden gust of wind howled through the trees, chilling them to the bone despite the warmth of the early autumn day. Again, the voice came, a whisper, barely more than a breath, but distinct enough to freeze the blood in their veins. "Don't let me go." The men froze, their movements stiff, the hairs on the back of their necks prickling in unison. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, his eyes darting nervously toward the car door. The others shook their heads, uncertainty creeping into their faces. They looked around at one another, shoulders tense, but there was no sound, no movement now, only the lake's eerie stillness and the air's weight pressing down on them. Mark, however, looked anything but relieved. His face had gone deathly pale, his lips trembling slightly as he slowly turned to the car. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just the faintest exhale of breath, like his lips had forgotten how to speak. "Mark?" someone called, their voice trembling with a sudden fear that they could no longer contain. Mark's eyes locked on the sealed car door, his hand shaking as it reached for his mask. It came from inside," he whispered hoarsely, barely audible. "I swear it did." Suddenly, the air seemed to grow heavier, oppressive. The lake, once a quiet, almost peaceful entity, now felt like a living thing, watching them, suffocating them. Then, without warning, a clunk echoed from within the car, followed by a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like something heavy being dragged across metal. The men recoiled, heartbeats racing in their chests, as a dark shape shifted inside the car. Not a reflection, not a shadow, but something solid, something alive. They could almost hear it, its breath, slow and shallow, coming from within the darkened interior. Too close, too close. Then, the unmistakable sound of a seatbelt clicking shut. "Let's just finish this," someone muttered. The door gave way with a sickening creak. The smell that hit them was more than just lake rot. It was decay, time, something old and forgotten, something that had been waiting. Inside, tangled in the seatbelt, was a woman's remains. The water had eaten away her features, leaving little more than a sunken form dressed in remnants of fabric. But clutched in her bony fingers was something unexpected, a photograph, somehow untouched by the water, untouched by time. In the picture, a young woman sat behind the wheel of the very car that had now become her tomb. She was smiling, her eyes bright with the kind of carefree joy that no longer had a place in that haunting vehicle. Her features were soft, her hair long and blonde, cascading over her shoulders like something from another time. Faded ink is scrawled on the back of the photograph. April 4th, 1986. Beneath it, a name, Lillian. For a brief moment, the air was still. No one spoke. They stared at the photograph. It was a key to a dark mystery. One of the men reached out and, as if against his own will, touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the paper, the temperature in the air plummeted to a bone-chilling cold that sank deep into their skin. With the cold came the unmistakable sensation of something watching, something waiting. Then, a sound, a soft, shuddering breath, almost a sigh, but not quite. And that's when the nightmare truly began. The photograph flapped once, unnaturally, as if moved by an invisible hand. The smiling woman's image blurred, her eyes darkening, her smile distorting into something sinister. Her face, frozen in time, began to twitch, as if it were coming to life. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the unmistakable click of the seatbelt. And then, the low whisper, faint but unmistakable, "Lillian is still here." a cold gust of wind slammed into them as though the air inside the car itself was alive. The men stumbled back, hearts racing in terror, their skin crawling. The darkness inside the car deepened as if something was pushing against the very fabric of reality itself, clawing its way out. Lillian was haunting the car, and she wasn't done with them yet. The truck's engine exploded into life on its own, roaring as the winch line snapped, sending the bug rolling backward toward the lake. One of the men screamed as he jumped out of the way, his flashlight flickering wildly. The car didn't just roll. It moved like something was steering it straight back into the water. And just before it was fully submerged, they saw her. A woman staring out, her face panicked from behind the front windshield. Not a corpse, a presence. Lillian's outline shimmered behind the windshield, her face pale, eyes hollow and desperate. Her once long, blonde, beautiful hair hung matted, full of algae. For one agonizing second, they saw her lips move. "Help me," she shouted. "It's not my fault, it's keeping me prisoner." Then, with an unnatural pull, the car was swallowed once more, sinking as if it had never been disturbed. The men stood frozen on the shore, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The lake was still again. The authorities tried again days later, this time with more advanced equipment. But when they searched the bottom of the lake, the car was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. Yet, on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, fishermen still claim to hear the sound of an engine idling beneath the water. And if you stand at the shore long enough, sometimes you'll see headlights glowing faintly from beneath the surface. Waiting. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate you.